We're talking now about Getting to Yes, Chapter 5. The authors of Getting to Yes encourage us to avoid what they call positional bargaining. By positional bargaining, they mean when parties stake out their positions and view any sort of concession from that position as having had to give up something. Positional bargaining means that parties sort of stake out their turf early on and try to protect it at all costs. And instead, they're trying to get the other party to give something up. It's the default stance for many bargainers. It's the most common way to approach a negotiation, but it's normally not a smart way to negotiate. For one thing, it generates confrontation because from my perspective, if I'm a positional bargainer, I want the most I can get. I don't want to give anything up. I want you to give stuff up. That becomes combative pretty quickly. This is a very costly way to negotiate with others. For one thing, when you're starting this way, you're assuming you have all the relevant information and you've already figured out how you can create the most gain for yourself. Well, you probably haven't. Your goal instead, as the authors explain in previous chapters, is to find out what shared interests you may have, find out what the other party would like. Again, remember that you want to try to uncover things that are low cost to you but high benefit to somebody else. If you're starting with a positional bargaining stance, you're not revealing the shared interests that might expand the pie. It's a very limited way to approach a negotiation. It's a very literal way to approach a negotiation. Another problem with positional bargaining is that you fail to get parties to buy into the results. It's one thing, and speaking now as an attorney, it's one thing to get the parties to sign on an agreement. It's another thing to get them to perform it enthusiastically. If people don't feel like it's their agreement, it's simply been imposed on them, they're going to do the least possible to satisfy their obligation on the agreement. And that's not what you want. You want people to be enthusiastic about performing the agreement. So you're really not meeting your needs. The more people participate in the result, the more they feel they are a co-owner of the result, and the more likely they are to make sure that the agreement is performed well. A final cost of positional bargaining is it may harm relationships. As you can see, it's pretty confrontational, and especially where the relationships matter, this can be costly to relationships. You may be able to think of someone at work or, God forbid, in your family who takes this adversarial position all the time. In some families, there are sometimes people who will confront that person, but most families over a period of time just stop engaging with that person. It's simply not worth the battle. And sometimes you even withdraw from those people because it's simply too oppressive. The relationship's oppressive. You don't want to be that person. You want to be the person who's open, who's creative, who wants to nurture relationships, who wants to create gain for all the parties. Be that person. The authors encourage us to be open to reason and closed to threats. This is what it sounds like. Base your decision on logic, not threats. When someone threatens you, try to be like Buddha, smile but don't respond. If it works, if when people threaten you it works, they'll keep threatening you. So, don't be a chump about this. But do be open to reason. And the way you can do that is to agree with others on what the standards are going to be. We have to reach a result that's fair. We have to save money. We have to be efficient. We have to obey the laws. We have to create agreements that could be precedent for the future. In other words, that could be a model for future agreements or it could be used by others in a similar situation. In law, we often talk about, is this case good precedent? Is this a law that we're going to follow in the future, applying the same rule to the parties in a similar situation? What kind of practices do you want to encourage in your organization, in your family, in your community? You want to create something that meets those standards. You can do this by developing objective criteria, that you're going to have fair standards. In other words, whatever those criteria are, people can agree that those are fair criteria. If we agree that we're going to build a community center, we have to agree that we will follow local zoning laws, that we will involve the community in the kind of center they would like, that we will take into account what planners tell us about best practices. Whatever makes sense in your situation, you have to agree about what those standards are going to be. And separate from that, the procedure, the process has to appear fair. In litigation, if unfortunately a dispute goes to litigation and actually goes to trial, someone's going to lose. No one wants to be that person. But if it appeared, and let's say that's you, certainly you're not happy about the result, but it takes the sting away if you felt the process was fair. If you got your day in court and there was a judge who appeared neutral and not biased, and a jury that appeared neutral and not biased, you're more likely to be able to live with those results than you are if it felt like it was a done deal. It wasn't fair. There was bias. The process didn't allow you a day in court. The process itself matters. Think about presidential elections. Someone, sooner or later, if it hasn't already happened, someone's going to get elected who you didn't vote for and who you don't think will be a good president. If the process was fair, you recognize that this is what happens in a democracy and you live with it. That's actually one thing that distinguishes this country from many other countries. The general public perception that there's been fairness. Frame each issue as a search collectively for some sort of objective criteria. Be logical and be open to logic as to whether or not the standards are appropriate. Be willing to change your mind. If someone brings you new and logical information, don't stay stuck in where you started. Say, great, I'm glad to hear that the state has changed its standards on building under these circumstances. Therefore, we can change our decision about how to do the project. It's hard not to be stuck in our original perception of what conclusion we think should happen, but try to recognize that you have this outcome bias and be open to persuasion. What information could someone else give you that would change your mind? If you can't identify something, then you're not being open enough. The authors encourage us not to yield to pressure, but only to principle, and that's exactly what it sounds like. When someone is trying to pressure you, manipulate you, emotionally threaten you, don't let that be successful. Be calm, but reiterate, we need to have a standard that allows for inclusion. We need to have a standard that will meet the state law. We need to, whatever your principles are, simply reiterate those. If you think about it, when you can think about going to the grocery store and compare an effective parent with an ineffective parent. There's a small toddler at the checkout line having a temper tantrum because their mother doesn't want to let them have Skittles. How successful is it when the mother yields to pressure? If you're that 2-year-old and you have a big fit in the grocery store, and once you have the fit, you get the candy. Gosh, I don't know, what do you think your future behavior is going to be? Actually, the mother is unwittingly rewarding bad behavior. So I predict she's going to get more bad behavior. Instead, yield to principle. When someone gives you some great reason that why their proposal furthers your principles, fabulous. Let's do that.